Before I jump into the passage I want to look at, I want to mention a resource I'm creating that might be helpful to you. So if you're interested in digging into the Bible and you're just like, I need some help with that. Bible's confusing, big book, right? It can be difficult, but I want to learn it. I want to live it. I'm creating a free resource called the Listener's Commentary. You can listen to it on Spotify or your podcast app on your phone. You can go to the website, listenerscommentary.com. You can scan that QR code. It'll take you there. It just is basically clear, down-to-earth teaching through books of the New Testament. So I'm almost done with the Gospel of Matthew. So that'll be book number 22 out of 27. So I have most of the New Testament done. It's pretty simple, pretty down to earth. I like to refer to it as blue jeans theology. It's Bible teaching for everyday life, Bible teaching for the rest of us. So, based on teaching the Bible for 20 years full time at Boise Bible College, I'm like, most of the world spends their time on their phone, on their tablet, on their computer. Let's put a resource to help people actually learn and live the Bible. That's what that is. So, if you're interested in that, you can check that out. It's completely free. I'm doing that as a crowd-funded sort of project. So, free Bible teaching for your life. All right. Now, beyond that, I'm messing everything up this morning. So the sermon I came prepared with, I'm throwing out, and we're going to do something different. And that was based on listening to the songs and sitting while we were singing, thinking, you know what, the sermon I prepared, I just don't think is the right one. So we're going to do something totally different. So we'll see how that goes. All right. Part of that is because a couple of the songs we sang really emphasized God's love for us. And I wanted to share a passage that has meant a lot to me over the course of my life, a passage that has been deeply personal to me, a passage that has changed my life in a lot of ways, made me who I am, made me the husband, hopefully I am, the father that I've been, grandfather that I am. And that passage is 1 John 3:1. And 1 John 3:1 says this. It says, look, behold, see how great a love the Father has bestowed on us, granted us, given to us, that we might be called the children of God. And that's who we are. And that passage has meant a lot to me because my earliest childhood memory is the night my dad walked out on the family. I was 3.5 years old. We were living in Tacoma, Washington. I remember very clearly that night. I was sitting on the stairwell in our house. So I'm sitting here on the stairwell. The front door is in front of me. My dad hands my 6-month-old baby brother to my mom, grabs his white Navy duffel bag, flings it over his shoulder, walks out the door. And it was night and it was raining. And I was 3.5, and I did not see my dad again until I was 7. And between the age of 7 and 18, I saw my dad 4 or 5 times. So I had virtually no relationship with my father. And this passage, when I came to know God and became a Christian, this passage really became very dear to me and central to me. Because having been rejected, as it felt as a young child by my dad, I now knew, once I met God, that I had a father who actually loved me. Behold, how great a love, not just a small love, a great love. How great a love the Father bestowed upon me, upon us, that we should be called children of God. And that's who we are. It's not a joke. It's not a myth. It's not a fiction. That's who we are. We are the children of God. And He loves us immensely and deeply and greatly. And that truth powerfully changed my life. Didn't matter that my earthly father loved me or didn't love me. I had a father. I had a dad who deeply and truly loved me. And there's a well-known story that Jesus told in the Gospel of Luke that is, I think, the paramount illustration or picture of the Father's love. If you've been around the Bible at all, you've been around church at all, you're familiar with the story of the prodigal son. Luke chapter 15. If you haven't been around the Bible, you may have even heard that phrase, prodigal son. But really the story in Luke 15 is not about a prodigal son. It's more about a prodigal dad. We don't typically know what the word prodigal means. We think prodigal son means, oh, he was a bad son. He, was a rebellious son. But the word prodigal doesn't mean bad or rebellious. The word prodigal means extravagant or wasteful. And the father in this story is the true example of somebody who's prodigal. So I want to walk down through this story in Luke chapter 15 as an illustration of this immense, extravagant, great love that we read about in 1 John chapter 3, verse 1. And so Luke chapter 15, let me set the stage, and then we're going to look at this story. Jesus has been preaching and teaching all around Israel. He's had a number of conflicts with some of the religious leaders, specifically because he's welcoming all the wrong kind of people. Like, he's teaching average, ordinary people. He's preaching to average, ordinary people. Not just that, he's eating, not just with average, ordinary people, he's eating with people that religious people should not eat with. He's eating with tax collectors, sinners, prostitutes, and the like. And so the religious leaders are like, this guy claims to be a prophet. People are hailing him as a prophet, but he eats with all the wrong people. And in Luke chapter 15, Jesus is telling a series of stories to address that problem. So he's got the crowd of all the wrong type of people, and then he's got the religious people who are saying he's at fault for hanging out with those people. The third in the series of stories is this well-known story of the prodigal son. And here's how the story goes. Luke 15, picking up in verse 11, and he, that is Jesus, said, there was a man who had two sons. So here we get a dad of two sons. And the younger of the two sons came to his father, and this is what he said to his dad. Dad, I want my share of the inheritance. Now just pause right there on that. I want my share of the inheritance. When typically do inheritance get given out? After death. After death. So for this son to come to his dad and say, I want my share of the inheritance, essentially means he's saying, Dad, I don't care whether you're alive or dead. I'm done with you, and I want my share. Now, as the younger son, he's entitled to a third of the estate. The older son gets 2/3 by Jewish law. He gets a third. And so he's entitled to a share of the estate. That doesn't mean he gets money. He gets a third of the family farm. The family property and family land that's been in the family for generations. His grandpa farmed this land, and his great-grandpa farmed this land, and his great-great-grandpa. Like, this is the family land. This is the family property. The whole reason the Jewish law had laws about not moving boundary stones or returning the land to the family after so many years on the year of Jubilee, right? Like, they had this because protecting family land was important. This son comes and says, I want my share of the family land, and I want it now, Dad. So go ahead, be dead because you're dead to me. Give me the land. What's a good Jewish dad supposed to do in this moment? Well, a good Jewish dad, everyone listening to this story would know what a good Jewish dad was supposed to do. A good Jewish dad is supposed to shame his son, rebuke his son, and punish his son, and all that. That's what a good Jewish dad would do. Like, how dare you, son, ask for your share of the estate while I'm still alive? How dishonoring, disrespectful, right? How slanderous. You have brought shame on the family. You've brought shame on me. You've brought shame on our village by even asking this request. That's what's supposed to happen. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of refugees from Vietnam that arrived in our neck of Tacoma. And so just around the corner from my family was this Vietnamese family, the Nguyen family. That kids were the same age. We played quite a bit with them. And one day I was invited to spend the night over there with them. And so I spent the night, slept at their house. Next morning, we're out riding our bikes and running around the front yard. And Chung, the young lady who was about 2 years younger than me, she decided to throw rocks at me and her brother. So she started throwing rocks at me and her brother. Throws a rock, hits me in the head, blood pouring down the side of my face. Her brother yells and screams about it, yelling at her. Her mom comes running outside, sees the blood, asks what happens. All this is happening in Vietnamese. I don't know what's going on. I'm just figuring it out as I'm watching. Her mom proceeds to drag me into the house, take me to the bathroom, washing my face, takes my t-shirt off of me because it had blood on it, gives me one of her son's shirts, puts it on me. And then after washing and doing all that, Chung, who is standing in the bathroom where this is all happening and she's cleaning me up, her mom turns to her and starts yelling at her in Vietnamese. I don't know what's being said, but she's yelling at her. And the next thing I know, here's what happens. She grabs her daughters by the back of the head and starts slamming her head on the toilet seat. And all I can imagine is in her humiliation and her embarrassment, yelling at her daughter because she had brought shame on the family in the neighborhood. They were the refugees in the neighborhood. They were new in the neighborhood. And you have shamed our family, and we're trying to make a start in the neighborhood. Apparently, this left so much of an impression on Chum that just a year ago, her and my sister connected on Facebook. And one of the first things she said was, "Please apologize to your brother for what I did." She was 10 years old. That's been over 40 years ago. Please apologize to your brother for what I did so long ago. Eastern cultures, hot climate cultures, have this thing called honor and shame. And it's a big deal in hot climate cultures, honor and shame is. To dishonor your family, to dishonor your village, everybody knows that deserves serious repercussions. So this son comes, makes this request, dishonors his dad and dishonors the village. And what does the dad do? Well, let's keep reading. Here's what happens. He comes and asks for his share of the estate. And how does the dad respond? Well, the dad then does this. And he, picking up in the middle of verse 12 or right around verse 13, and he, the dad, divided the property between the two boys. You want your share of the estate? Fine. I'll divide up my estate. Here's your third of the property. The dad's not supposed to respond that way. That's wasteful. That's overgenerous. That's gracious. You're not supposed to do that. What's wrong with this dad? Well, you keep reading the story, and verse 13 says, "Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into the far country, and there squandered his property in reckless living." All right, here's one of the things that someone hearing the story at first would automatically know. They would hear the story and they realize, wait a second, you can't take a farm with you on your journey. So in order to take what you have, what do you have to do? You have to sell it. You have to sell your property. This is family land. It's been in our family for generations. Your relatives have farmed this land, and you dishonored, disrespected, disliked your family so much. You sold off the family farm so you could have the money and go do whatever you wanted. And that's what this boy did. He sold off his chunk of the land so he could have cash. He took the money, went to a far country, which every Jew would hear that and think, oh, he went to Gentile lands. And so he goes off to the far country, and there he squandered. That's where we get the word wasted. He was wasteful. He wasted his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. I mean, he lived large, right? He lived high on the hog. I mean, he had a great time. He was buying this and taking friends out for that and doing whatever he wanted. And eventually it was gone. And then when it was all gone, things went from bad to worse because now there's a famine in the land and he no longer has money. What is he going to do? There's no food. There's no money, and he's desperate. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him out into his fields to feed pigs. Pigs. I mean, he's a Jew. Pigs are unclean. I mean, this guy, how far has this young man gone? right? Like everyone listening to the story knows, this young man he's about as far gone as you could go. He sold off the family land. Then he wasted the money in wild living. Then he's hungry, and he's so hungry and desperate, he's working for a Gentile, and now he's working for a Gentile, feeding his pigs. You want to talk about hitting rock bottom. That sounds pretty close to rock bottom. But Jesus keeps telling the story, and it goes even further. And he's so bad off, he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate. But no one gave him anything. He's so hungry, so desperate, he wants to eat pig slop. You can't get more rock bottom than that. So here's what happens. Verse 17. When he came to himself, he had a moment feeding pigs, wanting to eat their pig slop. And he comes to a sense and he's like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And so he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I'm perishing here with hunger? I'm dying of starvation. And the servants who work for my dad, they're way better off than me. Maybe I could go back as a servant. At least then I have food to eat. And so he says, I will arise, I'll go to my father, and I'll say to my father, and he plans his whole little speech. I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Could you take me in just as one of your servants? You don't have to call me son. This boy, this young man, he's so desperate that he's willing to risk whatever shame and whatever mistreatment he might be able to expect from his dad and from his home village. That's how bad off he is. He's that desperate, and he's like, you know what? I don't even deserve to be called your son anymore. Just make me a servant. So he gets up and decides to leave. And he arose, came to his father. So he makes the journey from this far country, however long it takes him, all the way back to his father's home, his family estate. And while he was a long way off, this is really important, he's coming. It's wide open country. His dad can see him coming. So he's coming from a distance, right? He's probably just on the edge of the village. And look what happens. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him. His father saw him. He's waiting. He's watching. He's occasionally turning to the horizon, wondering, I wonder if my boy will come home yet. I wonder when he might cross the horizon. And then one day, there it is. I'm pretty sure that's him. I think that might be him. His father saw him, and filled with compassion, his father ran and embraced his son. He runs to him. Now, a couple historical notes that are really important. A wealthy landowner like this, his dignity and his honor was measured by the slow gait with which he walked. That was Jewish custom and Jewish tradition. If you were wealthy and important, then you walked with a slow and steady gait. Certainly you never ran. That would be dishonoring and shameful. This dad runs, which means he's willing to humiliate himself for the sake of his lost son. He's willing to lower his status and bring dishonor on himself to rescue his son. And why does he have to do that? Why does he have to run? Well, because this is a collectivist society. We have a hard time understanding this, but you don't think in terms so much of the individual as in the group. And the group's honor is tied up with the village. So when the son dishonored his dad, he didn't dishonor his dad. He also brought shame and dishonor on this village. Word would spread. Did you hear about? And the whole village would know that he had been shamed. And so if the dad doesn't get to the son before the villagers do, what will happen? The villagers are likely to beat him with sticks and pummel him with rocks. because he brought shame on the village. So filled with compassion, the dad lowers his status, brings dishonor on himself, and runs to this son. And then what happens? Well, as you keep reading, it says this. The dad runs and comes to the son, and the father embraces him. That's important. Remember, this son has been poverty-stricken, working with pigs. Who knows what he looked like and how bad he smelled? And his dad hugs him, visible sign of welcome. And immediately, the son begins to start his rehearsed welcome home speech, right? I'm not worthy. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But before he could finish his speech, the dad stops him and interrupts him and said to his servants, quickly, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Like immediately, the dad interrupts him and says, no, bring the best robe. Who owns the best robe? The dad does. Bring my best robe, my finest attire, because this son is in rags and he looks like a disgrace. Let's get him cleaned up. And not only that, bring some sandals for his feet because he's barefoot because it's been such bad off. So let's put some shoes on his feet. And not only that, bring the ring and put it on his finger. What's the ring? It's the father's ring, marking his identity and his authority. Put my ring on the son. This is complete and full restoration. This isn't making the son grovel. This isn't making the son, beg for mercy. This is stopping the son from his speech and saying, look, you're totally welcome here. Here's my robe. Here's some sandals. Here's the ring. And then, if that weren't enough, the father also tells the servants, and go, bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. We're throwing a party. And who all would come to this party? All the villagers would be invited. Why? Because this boy is not just being restored to his father, he's being restored to his people. So all the villagers are going to, and we're going to throw a big village-wide party, and we're going to slaughter the fattened calf. It's time to celebrate. And he gives the reason why. Why? Because this son of mine was dead, and now he's alive again. He was lost, and now he's found. And they began to celebrate. And they're having a party to welcome home this son. This dad is prodigal. This dad is extravagant. This dad is wasteful. Did this son deserve this treatment? No way. But this dad didn't care because he was just happy to have his son back home. And so, in a display of extravagant mercy, compassion, and grace, in a display of extravagant love, he pours out his grace on his son and welcomes him home with a party. Now remember, he had two sons. How does the other son respond to this? Well, look what happens. Now the older son was out in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. It sounds like a party's going on at home. What's going on? So he called one of the servant boys over and asked him, what's going on? And the servant boy said to him, oh, your brother's come home, and your father's killed the fatted calf because he received him back again. And he's safe and sound. How did the older boy respond? Well, he responded like the Pharisees. Remember, that's who has been accusing Jesus of this sort of thing. He responded like the Pharisees, and he was angry and refused to go into the party. So now who's dishonoring dad? Now who's bringing shame on the family? Here's this older boy. Like the whole village is coming. We're having this party, and he won't even go in the house because he's so angry at his dad. So what does the dad do for him? Well, the dad came out of the house. The dad came out and begged him. The dad leaves his party. Again, every good Jew listening to the story would know that, okay, fine, you don't want to come to the party? You stay out in the cold. I'm not going to come and get you. That's what he should have done. But again, this dad is gracious. So he comes out to this angry self-righteous son and begs him, your brother's home. It's a big moment in our family. Come into the party. And the story ends without us knowing whether he comes in or not. This story, remember, Jesus is telling the story as a description of his ministry. The Pharisees are angry because he's welcoming home tax collectors and sinners, welcoming them into the family of God. It's a description of his ministry. The Father on one hand, or the Father in the story on one hand represents God, but it also represents Jesus as God in the flesh, now running to the lost people who are eager to come home, who are desperate to be welcomed back to the family of God and be welcomed to their people. That's who the younger boy represents. And the older son represents the religious people who, they always did everything right. They were always on the farm working hard. But they did it out of duty and obligation. They didn't understand the Father's grace and compassion. When I read this story, and I think about 1 John chapter 3, verse 1, this to me is the most clear, powerful picture of the kind of love the Father has for you and for me. Behold, how great a love. Behold, how great a love the Father has bestowed upon us. Behold how, not small, not little, not just a tiny bit, not just like, okay, I've done enough for you. No, how great a love. I will shame myself, dishonor myself to run to you. I will give you out of my riches to restore you. I will beg with you and plead you. How great a love has the Father bestowed upon you, upon me, that we should be called the children of God. And that's who we are if we're in Christ. If we're in Christ, we get to be the children of God, a son of God, a daughter of God. So I don't know what your experience was like with your earthly father. Maybe you had a great earthly father. Maybe you had a harsh earthly father. Maybe you had a earthly father who was emotionally distant. He was around, but he didn't care, didn't take I don't know. But here's what I know from experience and from Scripture. I know this. You have a Father who loves you more than you'll ever understand. You have a Father who runs to rescue you. You have a Father embodied in the person of Jesus who brings so much disgrace and shame on himself that he goes all the way to the cross. The cross was such a shameful, disgraceful form of death that Romans wouldn't even use the word cross and crucifixion in polite company. The cross was such a horrific form of death that Jews viewed anyone who was crucified as cursed by God. And your God, in the person of Jesus, went all the way to the cross, went from the highest of heights, heaven and glory, to becoming a man, to becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. How far will God go in his love for you to rescue you? Death on a cross. Death on a cross. How great a love the Father has bestowed upon you and upon me that we should be called the children of God. And my friends, that's who we are. And that's incredibly good news, isn't it? So let's pray.